I've been asked very frequently, can metabolic syndrome or diabetes affect my metabolism? And what does that actually mean? Well, it affects your metabolism in a lot of ways. One, insulin levels directly slow your metabolism or directly make you gain weight. Well, there's another way that it works. One of the mechanisms by which insulin actually causes you to gain weight is by slowing down the conversion of your thyroid from what they call T4 to T3. So, for example, most people's thyroid that they know of is actually the hormone called T4, which is a molecule that has 4 iodines on it. That T4 comes directly from a gland in your neck that looks like an H called the thyroid gland. And that test, what we do in your doctor's office routinely, is checked by either what they call a free T4 level or a TSH level. And those levels are fairly routinely checked. What isn't routinely checked, just as insulin isn't, is that when your T4 is released into your bloodstream, some of that T4, a very small amount, we're talking about micrograms, very small amounts, is converted by an enzyme in your bloodstream to T3. So the T3 in your body comes from T4, and it's just a small amount. Well, it's interesting because T3 is what's much more responsible for your weight loss or weight gain. It's also what's responsible for your metabolism, energy levels, especially in the late or mid-afternoon levels, where people get very sluggish with metabolic syndrome and diabetes in the early to late afternoons. They say, by 5 o'clock I'm ready to go to bed, or I can't watch the evening news because I'm just exhausted by the end of the day. That has to do with the T3 levels, which is basically your T4. An enzyme removes one iodine and creates T3. Well, unless you look for a T3 level in your blood, you have to ask for that level. It won't be on a routine panel. And what insulin does, or metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, where you have hyper or excess insulin in your blood, that insulin actually impedes the conversion, the enzyme that converts T4 to T3. So therefore, you produce less T3, and by virtue of producing less T3, you actually slow your metabolism for food and for energy, especially late in the afternoon. There's an anecdote where if you ask your parents or your grandparents, when is the worst time to eat my biggest meal? And the answer that you invariably get is, my worst meal, or the worst time to eat a big meal is at dinner time or late in the night. Why? Because you don't metabolize it. You don't metabolize it. Well, people knew this centuries ago. Your grandmothers knew this. But what's the mechanism mechanically or medicinally? Why does that occur? And that occurs is because T3 is released in the body through T4 via this enzyme, and it's done in the morning hours and in the early to mid-afternoon hours. And it basically shuts down in the evening when you're sleeping. And therefore, there is actual credence to that process that your grandmother said, don't eat my biggest meal at nighttime. So what occurs if metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes goes untreated or unchecked, so to speak? So, for example, you take the average person who has no problems, they then become a type 2 diabetic. Well, that's quite simple. You are now stuck. That rubber band has snapped, and their pancreas is not capable, or is on the very edge still, if it's early type 2 diabetes, of being able to make insulin either enough or at all. At that point, some people may be stuck with type 2 diabetes and have to treat it with medications, diet, and exercise for the rest of their life. Some of those people, at least in the early stages, can then actually be reversed, which is against what we learned 20 years ago in medicine. So to me, the key is catching the person in the metabolic syndrome stage, the pre-diabetic, or the person who has hyper or high insulin levels, but their glucose levels have not gone to the point of diabetes yet. So the rubber band is really stretched to its limit, but it hasn't snapped. These people are absolutely and totally reversible with good treatment, aggressive treatment. What does that aggressive treatment entail? It entails dietary changes, nutritional changes, a change of life. It also includes an exercise regimen. It also includes an aerobic exercise regimen. And then it includes a physician that's able to follow insulin levels and guide you medicinally on what are the correct medicines to take and guide you through the process on how long it will take to actually reverse the changes of metabolic syndrome. Now remember, it didn't take people overnight to get there, and so the problem is there needs to be some motivation and some education by the physician and all those involved to teach people that it doesn't go away overnight. It's a lifelong process, but that has profound implications when a person then takes prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, and prevents diabetes, and then goes back to normal. So what are the complications of metabolic syndrome and essentially of diabetes? Well, if metabolic syndrome goes untreated and unaggressively treated to where a person reverses their process, eventually they're going to turn into a type 2 diabetic. And so the problems that occur in those patients are the same problems that occur in the type 2 diabetics. And these problems are really intense and severe. And what happens is basically hyperinsulinemia and hyperglycemia both affect the blood vessels in the body. Not some of the blood vessels, but the body affects all of them. The problem is that some blood vessels in the body are small, and some are medium-sized, and some are large-sized. So where do you see complications first? Well, if it affects them all simultaneously, you'd expect to see changes in the small blood vessel areas before you see the ones in the large blood vessel areas. So typically the person's eyes, where you get visual disturbances, blindness, where the blood vessels are very small in the back of the eye, but actually give life to the eye, the vision is affected very, very commonly first. In addition, when you look at blood vessels in the body, the smaller the blood vessel, the more quickly it's affected. Well, where are the smallest blood vessels? If you look at the aorta in the chest coming out of the heart, that's like the big highway, and as it keeps branching further down your body, it branches into smaller and smaller roads, and the smallest areas are in your feet. They're the furthest away from your heart, and they are the smallest blood vessels. So people commonly and actually almost exclusively have diabetic foot changes. For example, they get ulcers on their feet because it's not getting enough blood supply, or they get cold feet, cold intolerance. So when a person with diabetes, metabolic syndrome goes outside, and they're typically affected over many years, the cold they don't feel quite as quickly as us that don't have this problem, and therefore they can get frostbite. Those are very common complications. Then you start moving to the medium and the larger blood vessels, the carotid arteries in the neck, the coronary arteries to the heart. So coronary disease, heart attacks, carotid disease, strokes, small vessels in the brain, what we call ischemic brain disease. All these are complications where people can then get having diabetes for prolonged periods of time. So for all those of you who are watching me speak today, I just want to tell you as a physician and as a person who's treated thousands and thousands of patients with both metabolic syndrome and diabetes, is there's hope. There's a lot of hope. Where you've gone to physicians, you've gone to clinics, you've gone to all these places, tried diets, tried exercise. Unfortunately, it's not just one thing. You have to do everything together as a whole. We need to take you into our control. We need to teach you what you have, teach you how to attack it from multiple factors, and there is hope. I've had patients that hopefully you'll see over time on the site, is that patients that were 400 pounds, 350 pounds, 200 pounds, of all different types, races, ethnicities, colors, origins, and people that came to me for preoperative evaluation for gastric bypass surgery. And after explanation, refusing to go through the gastric bypass route initially, taught them what their problem is, got them on medication, got them involved with carb diets, lower carb diets, got them reduce their sugar intakes, got them to reduce the calories that they intake, have them increase their exercise, their aerobics, their muscle building, and along with medicine, as we were talking, that over 6, 12, 18-month period of time, People have reversed their process. Their metabolic syndrome got under control, and they've lost 100, 200, 250 pounds and got back their lives. So there's hope. So in all this realm of badness that you hear about and that we talk about, you can do something about it.